I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the NYS Halls of Fame podcast. Our guest is one of the most distinctive voices in sports broadcasting, a storyteller whose cadence and passion have become synonymous with big moments on the court. Best known for his work with ESPN Radio, he has spent decades bringing the energy of college basketball and the NBA to life for listeners across the country. His ability to paint vivid pictures with words has made him a trusted companion for fans who rely on radio to experience the game. He's a graduate of Syracuse University's prestigious Newhouse School. He built his career through dedication, preparation, and a deep respect for the craft of play-by-play announcing. From local beginnings to national broadcasts, he has called countless memorable games, always delivering with clarity, accuracy, and enthusiasm. Beyond the microphone, he is admired for his professionalism, consistency, and commitment to the listener's experience. His work reflects not just a love of sports, but a mastery of his craft, capturing the rhythm, the tension, and the excitement of the competition. It is an honor to welcome Mark Kestecher to the New York State Halls of Fame podcast, where we celebrate excellence, legacy, and the voices that help define New York's rich sports tradition. And of course, we hand it off now to Rennie LaRue, one of our co-hosts and responsible for the Basketball Hall of Fame, where this gentleman will be inducted in just a couple of weeks. So, Rennie, it's all yours.
Mark, we pay Len extra for introductions like that. That was pretty good.
I was going to say, if you have a Cash App, I'm going to check to see if there's already been a deduction. That was impressive, Leonard. Thank you. And Jeff, thank you so much for having me on.
Tell me about tonight's game, Mark. Who do you like, UConn or Michigan?
You know, it's funny because I was programmed to not like the University of Connecticut, having gone to Syracuse University. And even though I've lived in this state now for almost 3 decades, I think much like the Boston Celtics, growing up in upstate New York and hating every Boston team, I think Brad Stevens softened me up on the Celtics about 10 years ago. And in some weird way, Danny Hurley's done the same at UConn. Michigan looks like the tougher team in paper. But I'm going to go with UConn tonight. Why not? I'll be the home state homer and go for the Huskies.
So growing up a Syracuse fan, who are your favorite Syracuse teams? Do you remember the 2 of your inductees in this year's class are father son, Leo Routens and his son Andy. Do you remember them?
Oh, yeah. Leo was playing when I was early in high school. I graduated high school in 1986. So Leo, I think, was already in the NBA by 83 or 84. When I got there, Pearl Washington was a senior on the 86-87 team that went to the championship game. I've worked with Keith Smart. I still tell him how much I hate him for hitting that shot that led Indiana to the win over the Cuse in New Orleans that year. And, of course, Andy, one of my favorite memories, might have been the first Big 12 tournament I was calling. It was in Oklahoma City that year. Syracuse and UConn were in a tight game late in regulation as I was signing off the air. I watched overtime in the back of what was then the Ford Center in Oklahoma City. They were still tied. I walked to the hotel, watched the second overtime in the lobby, still tied, went to my room, watched the third overtime there and told everyone we're going to go out to eat after this game ends. The fourth overtime, I was at the bar across the street, same for the fifth and the sixth, and it was one of the most memorable games in Big East tournament history. Andy was a part of it, and every time I call a Knicks game, right by the broadcast pavilion where the radio announcers call the games, there's a huge section, maybe you've seen, that has Andy's jersey. It's got pictures. It's got Sean McDonough's call, and it's a great memory. And I took a picture of it recently and sent it to Leo, and he knew exactly where I was because he'd been to that broadcast section. So I'm so thrilled for those 2 guys to get in as well.
Did the Cuse win that game?
They did win that game. Eric Devendorf, right? You just tested me. I'm like, I know it was 6 overtimes. I know it was Syracuse and UConn. We did win, right? Didn't we? Yeah, we won.
We had a referee who was inducted in our Hall of Fame who did that game, John Cal.
Oh yeah, one of the great referees in the history of college basketball. Um, I remember also, this is a major aside. I worked a UMass game in a 36-inch snowstorm that covered Amherst all the way to my area in central Connecticut and I-84 at a Knicks game at noon the next day. And I remember this is insane because why would anyone go on the roads? It was a state emergency, multi-state emergency, but I had a noon game. So I left Amherst at 9 p.m. 91 to 84 was one lane all the way to New York City. And I'm only remembering this because I'm pretty sure it was UConn and Notre Dame that went five overtimes. And I listened to all five overtimes as I got to New York City at about 1 in the morning. So I don't know what it is about Big East games and multiple overtimes, but they stand out in my memory. And I do not recall who won that game, Rennie. I do not.
I was a Big East fan because some of my classmates included Chris Mullen, Bill Wennington, Mark Jackson when they attended class. But I, Syracuse St. John's games were big. During those big '80s with Georgetown and UConn, those were the best
Those were the
days of the Big
those were the
East.
greatest days. I mean, I went to school. You guys may not know this, and I will do this as part of my speech on the 19th of April. I was a chemical engineering major as a freshman and sophomore at Syracuse University. And so the fact that I got to work with Chris Mullen and Mark Jackson, at ABC and ESPN was amazing. But I do remember those noon tips at the Carrier Dome on a Sunday afternoon, and it was either Syracuse Georgetown or Syracuse St. John's back in those days.
Yeah.
Mark, you didn't just wake up one morning and end up on ESPN. You had a journey, and and our audience, we would love to hear a little bit about how you got to where you are, which now will be inducted into the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame. So how does that journey begin?
It's an insane journey. I loved the art of radio play-by-play. I didn't know I was going to become one, but I was that, nutty kid who listened to Yankees games and Knicks games and fell asleep with the transistor radio and just loved that magic of radio that could, bring something to life from words. And there were little inside jokes that were going on. If you listened to every game, you might have known who the engineer was because oftentimes they're broadcasting by themselves. So they would talk to Hal or whomever who was running the ship, and you'd start to become part of this family. And so how do you get from chemical engineering to ESPN? Well, one is you don't do enough studying. You spend time at the Carrier Dome watching basketball and football. Your grades suffer. And halfway through college, I made a pivot because I knew I loved broadcasting, but I knew that wasn't going to fly in my family. It was, are you going to be a doctor or a lawyer? And I was like, well, I'm good at math and science, so how about engineering? Well, I wasn't built for it. All my friends were in the Newhouse School of Broadcasting. And Rip Rowan, you all remember, you may not know Rip Rowan
Sure.
from Long Island, but Rennie will know he was a longtime Channel 10 sportscaster. By the time I was growing up, he was at the end of his career, but he was legendary in Albany. And when he retired, he became in charge of the Albany Colony Yankees, Double-A Yankees farm team. And I was listening to a game the summer of 1988. I'm in this crossroads of my life. I know engineering's not going to be it. And how am I going to get into broadcasting? Who knows what I'm doing? But I hear the Albany Yankees on the radio. And first of all, I'm stunned that the Albany Yankees had a radio broadcaster. And Rip Rowan's running them. So I spent that entire summer trying to get up the nerve to intercept Rip as he, after the seventh inning, would always make a fast walk from first base to home plate and into the executive offices. And I swear I chickened out 8 times. And by the end of August, this was it. I had to get his attention. And I did. And when I mentioned Syracuse University, he melted. Like he was, he didn't want to even know who I was, why I was stopping him. But I said, I'm Mark Kestecher. I want to be your broadcast intern. And I go to Syracuse University. And the last 2 words, Syracuse University, all of a sudden he relaxed and he smiled and he goes, give me your number. We'll see what we can do. And so he called me months later, offered me the internship. I got it. I got in 1989. The Buck Showalter Albany Colony Yankees. Their outfield was Bernie Williams, Gerald Williams in the corner outfield spots, and Deion Sanders in center field. I mean, this was stocked and loaded, the beginnings of, the Yankees they'd become in the mid 90s. So I did that internship. The guy who was broadcasting those games was also the Albany Patroons announcer. I followed him there. He decided to take a baseball AAA job on the other side of the country. And Gary Holly, Hall of Famer, looks at me and says, "You got a tape? We don't have an announcer." And 21-year-old me just happened to be taping a game at the Armory one night, and I hand him the tape thinking there's no chance he's going to hire me. But he was probably stuck. I'll have to ask him about this. And they were going on the road for 2 weeks. And so there I was, Christmas Day in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, followed by Omaha, Nebraska, Wichita Falls, Texas, and Topeka, Kansas. And apparently I got the job on that 4-game, 2-week audition. And I did minor league sports in Albany for 6 years. I ended up getting a job in Cleveland, Ohio for 3 years, covering the Indians, then the Indians, now Guardians, the Cavaliers. The Browns weren't there, but I ended up hosting their Countdown to 99 show. And then my biggest break of my life was a talk show host in Cleveland who was moonlighting at ESPN Radio. Back then, it was only weekend nights. And I gave him a tape, and I said, if you see the guy in charge of ESPN Radio, give him this tape. The irony is, years later, he never listened to the tape. Greg Brinda, the host, would do the shows on the weekend nights in Bristol, and then the caveat was he was allowed to use those studios Monday morning to do his Cleveland show. And like all of us longtime broadcasters, were deaf because we wear headphones too loud for 50 years. So in a commercial break, he takes his headphones down, which are blaring way too loud, and the head of ESPN Radio hears my Cleveland update through those headphones and says, "Who's that guy?" And off of that, I got an audition. And 3 auditions later, I end up at ESPN Radio. I end up, hosting NBA and MLB games by chance. And then I end up doing another tape, which gets me a college basketball play-by-play opportunity, which ends up getting me an NBA opportunity because one of our play-by-play guys got sick. Next thing you know, a few years later, I'm the number 2 guy at ESPN Radio calling games. They give me a conference finals. And then in 2016, the biggest break, Mike Tirico decides to leave Monday Night Football and ESPN for NBC. At the same time, Kevin Calabro, the great Sonics announcer, goes to do the Portland Trailblazers, and like the Red Sea parted. I'm the last guy there. You're the man. That was 10 years ago, and I've been the voice of the NBA on ESPN Radio since. So I apologize for taking about 5 minutes of your time, but that's how convoluted and crazy this business is, that a failed chemical engineering major could end up the voice of the NBA on ESPN Radio.
Mark, we're all a real big fan, and I have to say you have an incredible voice, a voice that's made to do that. I mean, it's some people you can just listen to. I could listen to you read names from a phone book.
There's a lot of guys that I love that I listen on the air, and I feel the same way. So if I'm part of that crew, I appreciate those words. And we have kind of this stage voice. Like I don't know if I talk like this normally. I guess I do, but it's even heightened more when the quote unquote red light goes on and the studio guy tosses it to you for game 1 of the NBA Finals, and I go into my best, Kevin Harlan, Mike Tirico, Bob Costas voice, and you just become what you've been hearing your whole life. And you kind of develop it over time. Some do it with cigarettes and brandy. I really don't. It just, God didn't give me much. I can't fix anything around this house. If my car is on the fritz, I got to call somebody to change the oil. But I can broadcast a game. That's the only thing I got right now.
Apparently you do it very well.
One of your biggest fans and one of the guys who nominated you was Timmy Reynolds, who's the beat writer for the Miami Heat. Tell me about your friendship with Tim.
Yeah, that goes back to, I remember reading him when he was a local writer. And then when I left for Cleveland in the mid-90s, and then I end up at ESPN in the late 90s, the next time I saw him was in 2011. And Tim Reynolds, who I don't think I had recognized because I probably just read him. If we had met, it was briefly in Albany. But the Miami Heat were playing the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals. That was LeBron James' first finals with Miami. And I was the studio host back then. So we were probably up in the third deck. We would be live in the stadium. My co host, I think, was Will Perdue at the time. And this gentleman taps me on the shoulder and he says, "Tim Reynolds from the Associated Press. You may remember me from back in Albany." So that kind of rekindled our friendship. And then, Tim was at the forefront of those 4 years with LeBron in Miami. And I've stayed in touch with him since. He is an amazing writer. His ability to get information from players, from the league is, front and center. Whenever he tweets out something or writes something, it somehow always ends up in my broadcast somehow because he finds out first. And he's been a great friend, and I was so happy to be there for him last year. When I found out he was going into the Hall of Fame, I just said, I just hope I'm not working. And last year it was the weekend before the playoffs started. They traditionally give me that weekend off. So they know they're going to abuse me from the start of the play-ins until the NBA Finals. So I'm going to go 2 months straight running around the country. So I was so happy to be there for Tim last year. You and I got a chance, Rennie, to meet for the first time last year. And I don't think I've told you yet how stunned I was when you called me. I was getting on a flight in Minneapolis to tell me that I had been nominated. And it's just amazing what the difference what 12 months make, because I'm always looking forward. What's the next game? What's the next piece of information? I know I've had a really blessed career. I know I'm doing high level games that I could only have imagined that I could do, but you never really look back and say, wow, look what I've done. And these last 4 or 5 months have forced me to do that. And so even the pictures behind me that, my wife picked out a few years ago, it scares me how young I look in some of them. None of them had hair, of course. That was long gone. Once that was gone before I left Albany. But it's actually been a pretty amazing career. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it because I'm just looking ahead. But I'm so fortunate all those odd things fell into place that I could have this great opportunity.
Have you met Danny Green, who's also going in this year with you?
Yes, I called games toward the end of his career. There's a picture, you can't see it, but it's right by my finger there, where PJ Carlissimo, Doris Burke, and myself called the NBA Finals in the bubble. We lived in the Disney bubble in 2020, and Danny Green's Lakers won that championship. So I had the great pleasure to be studio host for his Spurs championship. I called his Raptors championship. I called his Lakers championship. And then last year, we did a game together, a late March game. And then just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did a game in Oklahoma City together. He's a burgeoning broadcaster. He does a lot of studio work for us on the television side. And he's also tried to break in as a game analyst. And I've had him on radio a couple times. Terrific guy. Very happy for him too.
Mark,
Who are your favorite NBA players?
My favorite NBA players growing up? My dad was a huge Phil Jackson fan. So that was kind of where our Knicks fandom came from. In the 80s, Bernard King was probably the guy when I was, impressionable. I was 9th grade, 10th grade, and then you couldn't help but fall in love with Patrick Ewing. And then the Phil Jackson Knicks of the early to mid 90s, or late 90s before he went over to Miami. Those were kind of the teams. And then it's funny how you get into national media and then my fandom kind of went away. Like I don't have a favorite NBA team anymore. I don't have a favorite NHL team. I don't have a favorite NFL team. The only team I still kind of live and die with are the New York Yankees for some reason. Maybe it's just baseball. It's what I fell in love with. I love the broadcasting aspect of it, especially radio broadcasting of baseball. And there's nothing better than an endless summer on the beach with a baseball game, blaring through your ears. So that's the one team I still root for.
Mark,
Mark, I really want you to get me Ernie Grunfeld and Bernard King's contact info. We want to induct them next year.
That would be great. Grunfeld, I know I'm trying to think who I know who's familiar with him. Maybe Glenn Consor. I'll find out through there. And then Bernard King, I've never met, but I've been in his presence. And I'll have to find someone from the Knicks. Maybe Mike Breen. Mike Breen might be able
Okay.
to help me out on that one. He's Mr. Nick, so I'll have to go through him.
Beautiful.
Speaking of Mike Breen, I was going to ask you, who were your influences when you broke into broadcasting? Was it Marv? Was it Mike Breen? Costas? I mean, I know they were all alumni from Syracuse.
Yeah, Marv Albert for sure on the play-by-play because as a kid, young kid, Marv was everywhere. He was ubiquitous. Rangers, Knicks. I didn't grow up in New York City, so I didn't see his sports casts. But by the time I was in high school, he was doing the Dave Letterman thing, and to see him, and then he was doing NFL and NBC. So Marv is a huge part of it. I think Bill White and Frank Messer and Phil Rizzuto and later John Sterling, hearing all those different voices and different approaches of doing it. And then I was, like I said, I was that odd kid who would not only listen to games at night, but then figured out if you move that dial really slow,
Hmm.
you would find Cleveland and Chicago and Minneapolis banging in on certain nights into Guilderland, New York. And now I could hear Jim Durham, how he calls a basketball game. Joe Tate, how he called a basketball game. Bob Costas was my kind of studio guy that I would look to because he was the ultimate studio guy before he got into the NBA play-by-play and Major League Baseball play-by-play. So when my opportunity came at ESPN Radio, and I told Bob this, I don't think he was too impressed with my very terrible story about all the things I learned from him as a studio guy, because they were really just nuts and bolts. Like even just taking it from your play-by-play guy at a commercial and getting it back, it was just basic stuff. But to me, that's what I wanted to sound like. I wanted that smoothness of how Bob Costas would run the studio and give a score. There was never an or an it was just nonstop smooth. And so that's what I always tried to do. So there wasn't any magic moment that I could give to Bob except to say his flawlessness is something I tried to achieve. Never really have. There's never been a perfect broadcast for me. There's always been like one little mistake that drives me crazy on a good night when it's only one. But Bob to me was and still is the perfect broadcaster. So all those guys I just kind of mushed up into a ball, tried not to impersonate any of them. But if I listen to a broadcast truly, if I ever take time to listen to a 10-minute run, I can always pick out, oh, I stole that from Jim Durham. And, oh, yeah, I remember when Van Miller said that with the Buffalo Bills. There's just little things, just little nuances that I hope nobody picks up because they think it's me. But I know it's more homage than anything else.
Mark, Rennie said something that is so true. You have the pipes, and when I say that, of a broadcaster. So can you imagine this would be the case? You'd be a chemical engineer, and somebody would say to you, you've got such a voice. Did you ever think of going into broadcasting? So you sidestepped that because you are where you should be. But what I would so. That I wanted to say that, but that's not a question. What I wanted to say is I heard something about you, and I think it was a 40th birthday, and you had gotten a call. I'd love to hear this story because you had a special birthday. It was your 40th. You had people coming, but you got a job. So if you could tell us.
I did. And before I tell you that story, it's funny you brought up the point about sounding like a sportscaster, having the pipes. I can't tell you how many times in my studio days at ESPN Radio, and a lot of us radio guys, no one really recognizes us. In fact, a lot of people see me and the first thing they say is, you don't look anything like I thought. And I'm like, yeah, I had a lot of hair in your vision, right? And they're like, no, not it. But I have had play-by-play guys walk through who I don't know. They're radio guys. I remember one in particular, Howard David, who did the Jets and the Dolphins and, was all over national networks for years. And I'm walking in one direction, Howard's walking in the other, and I just hear 5 words of his conversation. It's like that old game show, can you name this song in 3 notes? And I stopped him and I said, are you Howard David? And he goes, why, yes, I am. And I'm like, that's what I did. I was a highlight guy. I was doing SportsCenter updates on radio. I was hosting our MLB and NBA package. And when I would play highlights, I knew every announcer in Major League Baseball, the NFL, NBA, And someone would say, "Hey, who's this home run call?" Because I don't know who does the third inning or the sixth inning. I'm like, "Oh, this guy does the first or the fourth. That guy does the fifth or the ninth." Like I would know all those things innately. So I'm mainly a studio guy. I'm breaking in as a play-by-play guy. I did the Jimmy V Classic in 2005 on something called ESPNRadio.com before there were applications, apps on your phone. We were streaming. And Bob Valvano was my analyst, Jimmy V's youngest brother. And I worked some college basketball games for a few years. I told you I'm doing NBA studio. And then Jim Durham, the late, great Jim Durham, who was the Chicago Bulls radio man for their first 3 championships. Terrific guy. He was our lead NBA guy, but he'd had some heart issues. And I think had a stent put in his 50s and had some other heart issues in his early 60s. And there was a game in Detroit. It was Pistons against the New Orleans Hornets. And I was going to be the studio host. And I asked for that day off because it was going to be my 40th birthday. My mom was coming up from Florida. I invited all my family and friends. And on the Friday night before that day, March 20th, 2008, my boss calls me and says, "Good news, bad news." I said, "What do you mean?" "Bad news. Jim Durham's heart's acting up. He's in the hospital. He's not going to be able to call the game this weekend. Is there any way you could get to Detroit?" Now, mind you, this has been my life's dream since I'm 21 years old, and doing Albany Patroons games at the Armory is to call an NBA game. It just never happened for me. So I'm doing a handful of college basketball games, and now this opportunity comes. But everybody's coming to my house, including my mom. So, of course, I said yes. I hung up the phone and then ran into the other room and told my wife, "What are we going to do about all these people coming Sunday? I'm on a plane to Detroit tomorrow." So it was early enough in the day. I called all my friends and I said, "Party's been changed. It's tonight." My mom was flying up. She picked her up at the airport, have a big party at my house Friday night, fly to Detroit, call the game with Will Perdue sitting courtside for the New Orleans Hornets and the Detroit Pistons. And what I had forgotten, being a studio host all those years, the head coach of New Orleans was Byron Scott. And he sat right in front of me, stood right in front of me for the whole game. And I'm doing this, David West down the lane to Chris Paul, over to this side, Chauncey Billups, to Rip Hamilton. And I'd forgotten, how do these NBA announcers do it? Because these guys are gargantuan and they clog up your path to this day. But I had to learn different techniques to look around. But there I was at 40 years of age, which to me was near death. I finally got an opportunity to call an NBA game, especially all these young guys I meet that, rocket to stardom and get NBA calls when they're 25, 26, 27. I'm a late bloomer. Was late to figure out it was broadcasting, and I was late to getting an NBA game. But it was one more notch on the career ladder. My boss, John Martin, we called him the Chief, who's long since retired. He was the one who heard me do a studio shift for the first time and sent me on this upward trajectory. I thought I was ready from day one. He knew I wasn't. He was rough on me. I'd send him my tapes, my early offerings on ESPNRadio.com. How do you think you sounded? "I think I'm great, Chief. You should probably give me an NBA game." "Yeah, let me give you 17 things you could do better." But it was the best thing I could have ever had, was someone not to tell me how great I was and someone to tell me how poor I was in departments X, Y, and Z, and here's how you can get better at it. And so by the time he gave me that opportunity, I ran with it, and I haven't stopped running since.
So here in upstate New York, our Siena is our home team, and they're competitive. But this year, when they almost beat Duke, I was losing my mind. Up by 11, and they're 17-point underdogs. And for a long time, I thought Duke was going down. So they got tired and they ran out of gas and they lost by 6, I think. But it was really a jolt, first game in the tournament. When Mullins hit that game winner after being down 19, we were screaming. It was such an exciting shot. I was so happy for that kid. He just drained that like it was nothing.
Those are great memories. I am so glad that I broke my cardinal rule. I was with my mother in New York City on that Sunday of the regional final, and we were out to dinner in Little Italy, and there is no cell phones allowed at dinner. When you're with your family, turn off your cell phones. Don't be looking at your phone. If I was left to my own devices, I would be on my phone while I'm eating, not talking to anybody. So they've trained me well. Anyway, while my mom was eating and not looking at me, I said, I got to find out what the score of this UConn game is. And I saw it was, 1 or 2 point game, 8 seconds left. So unbeknownst to her, I put on the March Madness app. I had the sound really down low, and I took my phone and I put it on the table away from her, and through a forkful of chicken parm, I looked over, and that's when I saw that Mullen shot. And I'm so glad I saw it live, because I saw the turnover too. And once you see a final score in the paper and you hear about it, seeing the replay puts you there, but it's not the same. To me, at least. If I see it live and I could process it, not knowing what's about to happen, and not even hearing the announcers, just wondering, why didn't he just hold on to the ball? There was no 10-second count. Just let him foul you. And then that shot. So that was great. And the Siena moment, I had just landed coming home from somewhere, probably Oklahoma City, and Duke on my bracket was going deep. So I hated to pick against Siena, but most of, eternity, most of nation picked Duke to win that game, but Siena always has a soft spot in my heart. So listening to that game on the radio at halftime, I was like, could they pull it off? Didn't they have a big lead against UConn years ago? Same thing, 16-1. UConn came back to win that one, but Albany gave us that thrill, or Siena rather gave us that thrill. So that, and the fact the old Syracuse alum of myself came to mind and said, now would be a good time to sign Jerry McNamara, because his price is about to go up if they knock off Duke. So all that's going through my mind. And, it was unfortunate knowing, Duke's coming back and feeling it slipping away. But it was a great run through the MAC tournament, and a great first half in the NCAA game that everybody was paying attention to. And if they didn't remember Siena, they certainly know the name now.
Mark, what was your experience like calling the Albany Firebirds?
Ooh, that was a great experience for me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was not familiar with 50-yard arena football. My football calling experience, I believe, was 1 year with Union College. John Thomas was the announcer of Union College, and I was really young in the game. I had just done the Albany Colony Yankees. I was in with the Albany Patroons, and that was the year the Firebirds were being born. And I had done some Union College games and just making it up on the fly. And this is interesting, that first year in 1990, we only did road games on the radio. At home, I was in charge of music. Oh. And they were just like, hey, when something big happens, you guys are familiar with carts in radio in the old days. They're like 8-track tapes, cartridges. Yeah. And I had a rack of them. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'm 21 years old. I just pulled one off. I think it was Aretha Franklin, respect. Eddie Brown scores one of his 8 touchdowns, and I just popped that thing in and hit the button, and the place went nuts. And that's what I did. And I found these little patterns of what's the right song at the right time. What do people want to hear? It was a magical year. We were selling out the Knickerbocker Arena, it was called back then, 17,000 people coming. And then on the road, I would do games and kind of learn my way through it, how to call football. And the second year, you'll never guess who my analyst was. Joe Tessitore.
Oh, I heard him.
Mr. ESPN, yeah. ABC, and WWE. His mom owned a store in Stuyvesant Plaza. My parents owned a couple of stores at Stuyvesant Plaza. I didn't know just Joe Tessitore growing up. I went to Guilderland High School. He went, I believe, to CBA. He was a private school kid, so we didn't know each other. But Pete Doherty, the media columnist for a long time at the Times-Union, wrote a story about this 21-year-old broadcaster who sounded very mature for his age, doing the Patroons and the Firebirds. Joe read that story, somehow must have got my number from his mom, and he called me up one day. He was at Boston College, and he said, you don't know who I am, but my mom has a place at Stuyvesant Plaza. I want to be a broadcaster like you, and I want to be your analyst. And I was like, well, that's great, but I make $100 a week, and there's no money in it, to pay somebody unless you want to do it for free. And he said, no problem. My dad's got me covered. He'll pay for my travel. So unbeknownst to anybody in the history of broadcasting, myself and Joe Tessitore did a season of arena football together in 1991, and we've stayed in touch ever since. When I was up here at ESPN for my auditions in 1998, whatever, yeah, it was 1998. I knew Joe was the sportscaster at the CBS affiliate here in Hartford, had come over from Schenectady from Channel 6, and he was one of my first phone calls. And I said, you got to tell me about Connecticut. Where should I live? What is it about this state? And so we went to lunch, I'd say once every 3 months for a few years, until his resume blew up and he left Channel 3 and he started doing ESPN games. And then we just started seeing each other at random airports, hundreds of miles from Connecticut, even though we lived 10 miles apart. And so those are my memories of the Firebirds. I did 6 seasons. Touchdown Eddie Brown would score 8 touchdowns a game. We almost got to the Arena Bowl. It felt like every year, and something would go wrong. You know, we'd lose in the semifinals on a last-second play. But those are great memories for me. And, you know, now doing college football and being our lead college football analyst and doing CFP, first round, quarterfinal, semifinal games, and then hosting the championship, a lot of that is rooted in those Firebirds games from the old days, because I didn't really study football play-by-play as on the radio as much as I did baseball and basketball as a young child.
So, Mark, I heard you on an older discussion, I think it was about from 4 years ago, and you were talking about how you love baseball, but your style was more made for basketball and now football, but you have done baseball. So you could technically go into the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame, the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame, but I don't think, unless this has changed, I don't think you could go in the New York State Hockey Hall of Fame. You have not done hockey. Is that the case, or did that change?
Two quickies for you. First of all, I had not called a baseball game since my internship with the AC Yankees in 1989. I did a few innings at the end of my internship.
But you do All-Star games, right? You do the All-Star game.
I was hosting All-Star games, but in 2012, Rennie, you'll have to correct me as the baseball savant here, but I remember the end of the season, the Tampa Bay Rays and the New York Yankees were playing in Tampa. The Orioles and the Red Sox were playing at Camden Yards, and the division and the wild card in the AL and AL East were coming down to it. There were 4 games, and they were on TV, ESPN, and they were on radio as well. And it was also Yom Kippur, and all of our Jewish announcers were not able to partake. Fortunately, 2 months earlier, a buddy of mine was the voice of the Williamsport Crosscutters in independent baseball. They were playing in Norwich, Connecticut, and he said, why don't you come on down and hang out? I'd love to see you. I haven't seen you in years. I'm down there. I'm in the booth. And he goes, why don't you call an inning or so? I'm like, I haven't called an inning since 1980. I called like 3 innings. And I said, this was awesome, and I'll probably never call baseball again. So fast forward from that August Norwich game to the end of September, and my boss, the same guy who called me on my 40th birthday and said, can you go to Detroit? He goes, hey, I got a problem. I have 4 games to staff. I only have 3 announcers. All my Jewish announcers are gone. And I said, well, you do realize I'm Jewish too, right? He goes, yeah, but you can go, can't you? And I'm like, of course I could go. So I book a flight to Tampa the morning of this game, and it is the Yankees and the Rays, and the Yankees jump out to an 8-0 lead. Dellin Betances, I think, started that game. I don't know why that's rattling through my head. Anyway, the Rays come back. They tie it in the 9th inning. There's a rain delay in Baltimore. So now not only am I calling a Major League Baseball game on national radio, and I've done 3 innings of independent league for my only baseball in the last 25 years, now I'm also in charge of updating what's going on at both ballparks. They're back on in Boston. We go to the 12th inning. You know, the Orioles take the lead. So if the Orioles win, then the Red Sox need the Yankees to win. Otherwise, Tampa Bay gets the wild card. So I'd say it's the bottom of the 12th inning, tied game in Tampa. The Orioles hit a home run. I now give this update. The Orioles have beaten the Red Sox 6-5 at Fenway Park. So now the Rays have a chance to go to the postseason. Evan Longoria hits a walk-off homer in the bottom of the 12th inning, and the Tampa Bay Rays are going to the postseason. And so in my one and only Major League Baseball game, I got to call all that drama and had a decent call on that one as well. And then from there, my boss gave me one game a year. I did one game in the summer that usually nobody wanted to do, like the Brewers and Pirates in Pittsburgh. And I was happy to do it because it was the baseball game. It fulfilled my lifelong bucket list. And I got to see some pretty cool stadia along the way. But once I started focusing in on NBA and college football, I haven't done a baseball game since 2019. And every year I ask my boss, can I just have one? But we have a lot of great play-by-play guys. And to finish off the story of what you had mentioned, my style isn't, I wish I was a better storyteller for baseball. And maybe if I did baseball every day, I could become that. But it's hard to parachute in when you're calling one baseball game a year. And I'm just studying to make sure I know every position player, the starting pitcher that night, and every guy in the bullpen. Like, that's a full-time job right there. And when I stood behind John Miller one day in San Francisco, we were doing a Warriors game. John was our World Series voice on radio. And I had never met him before. And so my boss said, let me introduce John Miller. So I said, John, I'm really fascinated to see how you chart your defense and how you chart your plays. Maybe after the game, if you have 5 minutes, we can go over it. He goes, just stand behind me for an inning. I said, like right behind you? He goes, yeah, like right behind me, like be my shadow. And I said, isn't that going to be odd for you? He goes, been doing this forever. I call this in my sleep. I stood behind John Miller for 2 innings and watched his mannerisms, watched how he scored it, watched how he did his defense, watched how he integrated his analyst or partner. And I realized I don't think I could do that. You know, he's from another planet, how good he is. And his stories were off the charts. And so I think I would need to do baseball for 20 years to get anywhere near that level. Basketball, football, it all lends to radio. Everything's happening fast. Description is at the utmost timing. You might have 7 great stories. You're not getting to any of them. You're leaving everything on the table on a good game. We had a blowout game last week, Lakers and OKC, when Luka Doncic went down. We actually had time to tell a few stories. And now I'll finish with my hockey story. I was with the Albany Patroons, and I shared a desk with a gentleman who called the Capital District Islanders. I don't know if you remember that, but they were the Islanders' American League team, and they had a game in Utica against, remember, the Devils eventually became the Albany River Rats, the Utica Devils, but it was Islanders at Utica. The buddy, Andy McGowan, who was their play-by-play, got married and was going on his honeymoon, and he couldn't account for that one game. And so he said, can you do it? I'm like, I've never called hockey, but I love hockey. Sure, I could do it. And I was on my own, one-man show, drove myself to Utica. I just barely knew the names of the guys that played. I would hate that anyone might have that cassette tape somewhere. I hope it's burned. I hope that transmission is still just passing Pluto right now, because I have no idea what I said. I entertained myself. I hope I entertained, the countless 5 or 6 who listened to that broadcast. But that was it. That's the extent of my hockey. And I love listening to hockey announcers. They're also another breed. I'm a good friend of Kenny Alberts, and I love that he can do both television and radio. Like Bob Costas can do both television and radio. Mike Tirico, same thing. They just know how to make that switch, and I'm so impressed by those guys. I love watching them work.
We inducted Barry Melrose a couple years ago into the New York City Hockey Hall of Fame, and Steve Levy came, and I never even saw him in the room. He was sitting at Barry's table, and before I knew it, the evening was over, and he walked up and said, "Hi, Rennie, how are you?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I would have had you come up and talk," and it gets so crazy.
Yeah.
What'd you think about the dinner last year, the event?
Oh, I loved it. First thing is, seeing all the past Hall of Famers and everyone who's involved with basketball from not just the era, that I was active in Albany, but, just guys I met along, like Don Bassett, who he was with the Patroons at one point. He was with St. Rose when I did St. Rose for Brian Bury for a year. I would see him at different games, and then I don't know, maybe as the internet age happened in the mid to late 90s, when we all kind of got AOL for the first time and started, finding people through email, somehow a message got to me from Don to tell me how proud he was of where I had come from and where I was going now. And so there was also that special bond. So seeing him last year, I hadn't seen him, I don't know, maybe 15 years. So that was awesome. and seeing all the different people and then watching the presentation. Um, it was awe-inspiring because these are guys that I knew. I'm trying to remember one of the guys that went in, but he's a University of Albany player of games that I called.
Right.
And I remember going up to him afterwards, and I apologize, I don't have the name off the top of my head,
Andre
but
Turner.
Andre Turner, thank you. And he was born in Monticello, New York. That's where he grew up.
Correct.
And I was born in Monticello Hospital. I grew up in Liberty, New York for my first 8 years, and then we moved to Guilderland in 1976 when I was 8 years old. But I remember it took me back to writing my boards and writing Monticello, New York, because I wanted to know where everybody was born. And then here he is, going into the Hall of Fame, and I just happened to be there for that. So that was spectacular. The stories were fun to listen to. I think I've told about 18 different people about Mike Dean's end of the night appearance, which is legendary. So that was a lot of fun. And then obviously being there for Tim, and he gave me a little shout out in his speech. So it was a great night overall. And all my friends and family that are coming, I said, look, you're going to learn something about New York State basketball. You're going to have a great meal, probably have a few drinks before, and you'll walk away, impressed that you came to the night. And so that's what I took away from it last year. And I kind of kicked myself that was my first. This is number 17, right? Where was I all these years?
It's hard to crack, let me tell you. It's as you know, we're putting Roger Clemens in the Baseball Hall of Fame this year. And I talked to Bob Costas, all the time. And so I wanted to feel him out about, how he would feel about Roger. And we had great conversation, and he was for it. And we reasoned it out. And he goes, Rennie, it's great that you want to put him in, but he'll never come. And I'm like, are you sure about that? He goes, yeah, he won't come. So 2 weeks later, Brian Cashman called and said, here's Roger's number. Give him a call.
Wow.
He'd love to be inducted.
How about that?
So
Bob laid
I
down the
told
gauntlet
Bob
for you. He said he'll never come, and you said, "Okay, now I have something to shoot for," and you got it done.
Right. And Costas was surprised, but Mark, everybody comes to these. Mike Ruzioni came in hockey, and Mattingly came in baseball, and basketball. I've had Sam Perkins and Jimmer Fredette, and Bassett will be back again this year, and
Good, as they should. It's your roots. These are your roots. Good friends of our family went to Linton High, in Schenectady. So growing up, I heard all about Pat Riley, who was, in my mother's best friend's class, and Barry Kramer and all those stories that you heard. And so it's great that you can get to a certain height in the sport of your choosing, the profession of your choosing, and not forget about where it began. So I'm so happy to hear when guys and girls come back for that honor.
I always tell Jeff and Len about Barry Kramer, who literally walked away from an NBA career with the Knicks to go to law school and ultimately become a New York State Supreme Court justice.
Would never happen today, right?
Oh, this guy was tall, dark, and handsome, could run like the wind, could shoot, he could elevate on his jump shot. I'd be in his judicial chambers, and all we would do is talk about basketball. He'd tell secretary, don't interrupt me, this is an important meeting. And he'd have balls and jerseys in his judicial chambers. One story I've got to tell, unrelated, but I was in his chambers, and he had forgotten there was a will dispute. So the Hatfields on one side, McCoy's on the other, and Barry doesn't want to do this because he's having fun talking basketball with me. So he goes, oh, yeah, I forgot I had it 2:00. Rennie, come sit in the jury box. So I sit in the jury box with a scribble pen and a yellow legal pad, and I'm just scribbling and writing things down. And both sides arguing that were so disturbed that they didn't know who I was. Why was I taking notes? And they were so off their game. Barry goes, counsel, approach the bench. And the lawyers went up, and they want to know who I was. But he goes, clearly you're not interested in what's going on. Case adjourned until 3 months from now. Next time you come back, be ready. We were in court 6 minutes. It was the funny. Barry was great, and he loved Pat, and what Pat's done with the Knicks and the Showtime Lakers and with Miami. I mean, we are steeped in tradition here, and all three sports. It's amazing. We've had 36 events, over 12,800 people come,
It's
and
amazing.
it's really it's so fun for me to listen to the speeches. I really don't care how long anybody talks.
You
But
run a tight ship, though. I'm nervous. You run a tight ship.
Gary Holly pulled me aside and said, "We all love you, but you have to take the mic at 10 minutes. You have to do it."
Oh, yeah.
I said, "I can't. I don't want to hurt anybody." "You have to do it." So I'm like, "Okay." And the first year I did it, I was so embarrassed I was going to offend somebody. And then when I got done and I walked to the end of the room, people would always say, "Well, it was fun, but too long." When I start taking the mic, they say, "Great night. You did well."
That is
So now
true.
it,
I had to interview the late Bill Walton many times in pregame shows in the late 2000s, like 2007, 2008. And we used to have to pre-record those because you could not divert him once he got going. I would try to step in, but the stories were so good and so rambling and went into branches that I'm like, how did he get from, oh, that's brilliant how he got from A to B and then to C. And then, the poor guy who had to edit those things down to a digestible 4 minutes. I'm like, good luck with that. I asked him one question. He went 12 minutes. So I would not be a good host of these of the Hall of Fame speeches and inductions because I do struggle with that. I got better at it over the years because we have these things called hard outs in radio, and they're going to commercial whether we say we're going to commercial or not. And you'll hear that happen sometimes. Like, what happened to the guys? They stopped talking. Well, you're gonna hit a hard out, and so sometimes you just have to smoothly know that moment where you can get there. In your case, grab a microphone. In my case, I can hit the off button and say, it's been so great to have Bill Walton with us. And coming up next, the Lakers and the Celtics in Game 3.
We are talking to Mark Kestecher. Mark will be inducted into the New York State I apologize, basketball.
In my dreams.
Into the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame, April 19th of 2026. Mark, you are someone who has, you're not an overnight sensation, and which is a great thing. I think it makes you appreciate what you've achieved that much more, especially in this industry where we become so familiar. And this is even with ESPN, we become so familiar with the voices of the teams, with the voices of the game. And unless you get one of these announcers saying something stupid, they stay on the air, which is great because it's nice to, you speak to people and, Met fans will know the name, Howie Rose, who is retiring, but after years, Marv Albert is a voice. You say Marv Albert, and there isn't one person who doesn't go, yes,
Right.
So the voices are distinct. So it is tough to get, unless there's expansion. Forget the players that want expansion. The announcers probably want expansion because it gives more jobs. But unless you have something like that, these jobs are hard to come by. So what can you give as some advice to somebody listening to this who wants to go into this field, which is a tough field, but if you succeed, it's very rewarding. What kind of advice can you give?
It's an incredibly tough field. I know as I get older and farther away from the end of my college career and the beginning of an age, which I still say is do everything. Call a hockey game, call a baseball game, studio host if the opportunity comes, be a public address announcer at a game. Maybe produce, be on the other side. It may not be, you want to be that guy who's calling the game, that voice you're hearing, but maybe your gift is production and coming up with these, slick opens that'll be seen on television or heard on radio. So my first bit of advice is do everything. When I speak in Zooms to lectures at university, I sometimes feel bad because, I often say play-by-play is an art form more than it's something you can be taught. So of course I'm saying this to students who are paying upwards of $70,000-$80,000 a year to go to broadcast journalism college. And while that has tremendous amount of benefits and also has long-lasting range in that, let's say, for example, you go to Syracuse University on any given night, Mike Tirico might be there, Bob Costas, might be there, any great Syracuse alum who's in broadcasting. And so that might get you an interview that you might not get elsewhere. So you're networking at an early age. But I've always been because I was a latecomer and I struggled because I got to it late and I had to hustle my way to jobs and be good enough to catch somebody's ear and be able to work through mistakes and get better at the craft. And so my second piece of advice, which I don't know if it holds up still, is don't be afraid to go anywhere to do it. If you grow up in Albany, New York, and there's an opportunity in Boise, Idaho, it may be a little scary to uproot yourself and be a couple thousand miles away. But if the opportunity is in Appleton, Wisconsin, that's where you should try to go to. And so those were always, my early things were do everything, leave the hometown if you have to. I would always say be prepared to work for almost free, which is harder to do these days. In the old days, you might be able to find some rent for $250 a month in Mechanicsville, New York, which I did, and live off of ramen noodles and Kraft macaroni, mac and cheese, so, or in my case, marry a woman who at the time we were boyfriend, girlfriend, she is still a dental hygienist. And so she was paying the bills while I was out broadcasting Firebirds and Patroons games for $100 per game. And so it was all about repetition, and it all comes back to your 10,000 hours. And very few are fortunate to do this in their 20s or their late 20s. Most may finally get that opportunity in their 30s. And in my case, I finally got the opportunity at age 40 in the NBA because of the route I took. And part of that discussion of trying everything is I gave up on my play-by-play dream. I always thought I could be a play-by-play guy, but I saw my route. And my route was to become a studio guy. I did University at Albany, I did St. Rose, I did Albany Patroons. I had hoped to do Siena College, but when I got to WPTR, their rights shifted, I believe, to WROW or somewhere else. And I think Roger Weiland, actually, after Doug Sherman was calling those games. And so I knew being a studio guy on our all news station, and then being a studio guy at a 50,000 water in Cleveland, Ohio, that broadcast Major League Baseball, that was an opportunity for me to be close to it. I was working with the play-by-play guys I wanted to be. And all the while, every once in a while, I would go sit in the crowd or in the press box at then Jacobs Field in Cleveland, and I would hold a microphone with a tape recorder and call a game. And I was always freshening my play-by-play. So when the opportunity came where somebody invariably is going to need someone, you can say, here's my work. What do you think? Close enough. You're the guy. And so that's what I always preach. Be prepared. The old preparation meets opportunity, luck, but always, work at your craft and don't be afraid to try something new. And now it's a little easier on LinkedIn or other places where you can meet people through social media. It has its pluses and minuses like anything else. I love getting out there, going to a game and bumping in, to Kevin Harlan and introducing myself and having a friendship that way and learning from them. So, networking, repetition, as you said, these are hard jobs to get. And you may be in the direction of play-by-play, and then you take a left at Albuquerque, and next thing you know, you're, sports reporter at a all news station. And that might get you to where you want to go. It did for me. It just innately felt like the right move. Be the best studio guy I could be. And if I never call a game, so be it. I'm the host of the NBA Finals, and if that was as good as it was going to get, I was thrilled to be working with Brent Musburger and Mike Tirico and Jim Durham on the NBA Finals and Kevin Calabro. That was as close as I was going to get. I was fine with it. And all the while hoping to break in, and then things broke my way. And Apparently, I had a gift that I knew I had, but nobody else knew about it. I had to kind of bang them over the head and let them know, like, I do have a gift in play-by-play. Just give me my chance, and it all kind of worked out. So as much as there is some randomness in the career, we all start in the same area, and so that's a lot of the advice I've given over the last 30 years.
Well, we're so grateful that you're joining us on the NYS Halls of Fame podcast. We congratulate you on getting into the New York State Basketball Hall of Fame. Rennie, as the founder, executive director, all that jazz of the New York State Baseball, Basketball, and Hockey Hall of Fame. We're going to give you last licks with, well, I guess you don't say that in basketball. You just say,
Last
you
shot.
get the last shot with Mark. So, Mark, thank you for joining us, and Rennie, close it out.
Len, thanks so much, both to you and Jeff. So happy, that you're being inducted. Honored to induct you, Mark. It'll be a thrill, and I can't wait for April 19th.
It's going to be awesome. Can't wait to be there. It was so much fun to be in the crowd. You might be shocked to know that I'm not the best public speaker, or wasn't the best public speaker. I love speaking to millions where no one can see me. I think I've gotten better at it, so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to tell my story in 8 to 10 minutes. 8 minutes, I know you want to keep it in that direction, but I'm looking forward to it because all my life, being the focus of all these peering eyes has been like a melting point for me. I'm like, I don't want to talk in front of people, but much has changed in the last 30 years. I think I'll be up to the task, and I look forward to having a chance to entertain and inform about who this ESPN radio broadcaster is that you've been so gracious to honor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mark.